Okay, hello everyone, good evening. I am Karthik Derasari from the GDG Cloud Ahmedabad organizing team, and I would like to welcome you all today to the Google Cloud Next Extended series, which is hosted by GDG Ahmedabad, GDG Cloud Ahmedabad, and GDG West India team. I am so happy to see all of you joining in today to learn more about Anthos, which is Google Cloud's application modernization platform. We are also going to have a look at different services and some solutions which are built using Anthos. I am also very happy to announce, I'm also very happy to share that we'll be soon having DevFest India, which is the biggest developer festival organized by GDGs across India. You will definitely receive an official announcement very, very soon. Today, we have Kaivalya Shah with us, who is working as cloud consultant at Deloitte. So, over to you, Kaivalya.
Hello everyone. Uh, Thanks for having me, and it's pretty exciting time for with Google Next going on. So today I'm here to share with you about Anthos and application modernization. Um, I know there's a lot of updates going on in the news, like with Anthos and GCP. So my aim here is to try to make sense of everything for you and give you a brief introduction to Anthos, what you can do with it, the various components of Anthos, and how you can use Anthos. So we'll start with a brief introduction for application modernization. Um, so application modernization in a sense is has the ultimate aim to optimize developer velocity. uh, Developer velocity increases the resiliency for your applications, and ultimately it improves your business. Uh, so, so this uh, paradigm for modernization is what enterprises are looking into these days, and to enable the modernization of your of the enterprise's applications, there are architecture patterns like microservices. There are constructs like service meshes, which enable the connection of the microservices, as well as provide additional capabilities like encrypting the communication between the microservices themselves, enabling the service discovery, also allowing the infrastructure to have an ingress to allow the external traffic and to serve your application externally. Um, Authorization is also one of the main advantages of a service mesh, where you only want specific microservices to be able to communicate with your very critical microservices, for example, any payment microservice. So service meshes allow the kind of control that you want over your microservices. The last part is multi cloud or hybrid cloud. So um, that is an entire another paradigm for infrastructure, where the enterprises are realizing, even companies of all kinds of sizes, that to avoid vendor lock-in, multi-cloud and hybrid cloud are a very good approach, and it will not go away in very soon time very soon, because there are a lot of advantages of running your own applications on a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud setup. Obviously, you can avoid vendor lock-in. You can migrate your applications from one platform to another, from one infrastructure to another. You can get the best of each world with your on-premises. You can have a control of your hardware and the licensing, and um, if also required for compliance or regulatory reasons, you can use your on-premise infrastructure to solve some of the services for your application. Uh, there are also performance and resiliency benefits in case there is a failure or there is a bursting required in a time where the performance is needed, more performance where you cannot scale up appropriately on your premises. You can burst to the public cloud with seemingly unlimited infrastructure on the public cloud available. Um, those are the benefits and the companies are realizing this now. To enable these kind of setups, you need to have a application deployment platform which will work everywhere. And that is where containers and Kubernetes as the container orchestration have become the de facto for deploying applications across environments and across infrastructure. Containers have a undoubted benefit of deploying everywhere, deploying many times and writing once. And Kubernetes provides with a declarative based configuration approach with your reconciliation loops and uh, with third-party integrations and yeah, obviously the support of the open source community. Um, so everyone knows this. I mean, if you're here, then obviously you know about Kubernetes. So I'll not spend much more time on Kubernetes. We'll move on to Anthos, where why we are here today. So so with these multiple clusters that are Kubernetes clusters that are there on the public cloud and on premises on various other clouds, Anthos is a platform built by Google Cloud with the aim of giving a single pane of operations for your multiple clusters and provide add-on services like serverless offering like marketplace applications, as well as security features like policy management, configuration management. So Anthos is basically a collection of services. There are a ton of services, and I will give a brief for each of the service today. Um, it's growing very rapidly, and there is a lot of depth to each service inside Anthos. So we'll try to cover an inch deep introduction for each of the service and try to make sense of everything that's under Anthos. So starting with Anthos on other public clouds. So GKE, which is Google's managed offering for Kubernetes, is also available on AWS and on premises. So GKE on AWS and GKE on premises. These are separate services which you can use independently, even if you're not using Anthos. So using GKE on-prem or GKE on AWS, you can provision those clusters in a managed fashion, and Google will manage the master node and the configuration for the Kubernetes components. GKE on-prem is currently supported for VMware. Um, and there has been a recent announcement with support for HP's hyperconverged infrastructure platform, SimpliVity. So, so you have a couple of options for your on-premises environment, and Anthos is also recently available in beta for bare metal environments. So, in places where a hypervisor is not very feasible way to go, like edge locations, or you have micro environments, uh, you can use Anthos bare metal without a hypervisor and manage your Kubernetes clusters there. So that's a basic intro to Anthos. So the main aim for Anthos is to allow companies to modernize their applications wherever they are in place. So if the applications are already on premises, the modernization of the applications is now decoupled from the migration of the applications. Uh, so without a platform like Anthos, the modernization has to go hand in hand with the migration. So Anthos allows you to modernize in place. Also, there has been an observation in companies where uh, they use Kubernetes to deploy the applications, that there are a lot of clusters because it has become very easy to deploy Kubernetes clusters in your development environments in various other infrastructures and for each team. So Anthos provides you a centralized uh, management plane for each of your clusters and enforce the configurations and enforce the policies that you want in each Kubernetes cluster in your organization. So, so coming to the first feature of Anthos, it's called Anthos Connect. Obviously, when you provision a GKE cluster, you can immediately take it under Anthos under your Anthos management. But in the case of Kubernetes clusters that are not provisioned on GKE, you can use Anthos Connect or attached clusters. It's as it's referred to in some places, to add your existing clusters to the Anthos configuration and Anthos management. Um, Officially, Amazon EKS and Azure AKS are supported, and it is claimed that any Kubernetes conformant distribution can be added to Anthos using Anthos Connect. That means even mini distributions like K3s uh, or any other Kubernetes clusters can be added to Anthos Connect by the conformance standards. So how the Anthos Connect works is you get after you onboard your cluster onto Anthos, you get the cluster your cluster on the Anthos service page, and you can enforce your policies. You can create service mesh on top of it, and you can create Ingress on top of it for managing your microservices. And how you onboard your cluster on Anthos is you have to create a Kubernetes service account with a certain permissions called view and node reader, and the service account credentials can be passed to Anthos, or you can also use OIDC login to onboard your cluster to Anthos. Once you do that, there is a deployment called Connect Agent. So Connect Agent um, is a deployment that runs in a separate namespace on your cluster, and it creates an outbound connection to the Anthos control plane, which is long-lived. It is encrypted, and it listens for any config changes from Anthos in case there has to be any changes in the cluster, and the agent makes sure that those changes are executed. Uh, there is one important concept in under Connect called environs. Environ is the short for environment. So environs are a logical grouping of clusters, and within each environ, there is a concept called namespace sameness. So namespace sameness basically means if you have multiple clusters in an environment and you have a namespace called front end on the cluster, for Anthos, it is the same namespace from Anthos's perspective. So that's called a namespace sameness. There is also service sameness within environment. So if you have a service name with the same service name in the same namespace name in across clusters in the same environment, for Anthos it is the same service. It so you can use those services to create a ingress and distribute your traffic. So coming to the next major feature for Anthos called config management. So config management is a controller and an operator basically in terms of Kubernetes, which helps you to enforce configuration as code, as you can define the desired configurations in your cluster in YAML files, and the config management operator enforces those configurations on each of your clusters. This is a very important service in terms of security, where you want to enforce certain standards across all of your Kubernetes clusters in your organization. Um, that's the main purpose for config management. It is known as config management under Anthos, but it's also called config sync under GKE. So if you only have GKE clusters, you can have config sync enabled across multiple GKE clusters, and that will be only on GKE. Now, this was also known as Nomos earlier, and it has been renamed to config management. So you might still see the API names as Nomos in some places. As I said, you can synchronize your configuration across clusters, and again, this comes to the concept of environs from the previous slide for Anthos Connect, where you can have environs as a logical grouping of your clusters, and you can enforce the compliance policies in each environment using config management. It is mainly enforced through GitOps. It's very heavily focused on Git, and that's what helps you implement review process and policy as code, continuous integration, and all those great things which come with the Git configuration management. So specifically, when you talk about config management, there are certain objects that you can enforce on all of your clusters. You can have some certain CRDs, custom resource definitions, which you want to be applied on each cluster. You can have those. You can have namespaces where you want each cluster to have a certain namespace for auditing, for logging, for or some compliance purposes. You can also have cluster roles, cluster role bindings. You can have pod security policies to enforce any pod configurations that you want across all of your clusters, and this will be enforced as a admission controller. These are the admission controllers which enforce the configuration that you want for each of the deployments and pods in your clusters, as well as network policies and resource quotas can be enforced across clusters. So this is basically how you install config management on your clusters. Through the console, it's straightforward. You can just enable config management. There is no need for any setup. But if you look into the setup guide and how to set up config management on your own, you can apply this YAML file which is available, and it creates a custom resource definition CRD for config management. So later, when you create your config management, they are enforced in Anthos. Now, to enable all of these different kinds of policies, there are several controllers, as you can see here, called hierarchy controller, which you can enable like this from the deployment YAML again, and you have a policy controller along with several other controllers which you can refer to in the documentation for config management. So this is how you install config management on your cluster. There is one specific kind of config which I want to show, that's called a constraint template. So a constraint template allows you to flexibly define where what kind of validation you want in your Kubernetes objects. Now, first thing you do is you define a template on how you want your constraint to be defined. So here you can see that the schema says the property called invalid name in the constraint should not be allowed in any object. And once you apply this constraint template, once you create this constraint template, you can use this CRD called create deny name, which you can see here, the kind creates deny name in the template. And in the spec, the parameters you can pass the invalid name that you want to enforce across your clusters. So this is one of the examples for config management. So the next major service for Anthos is Anthos Service Mesh. It's based on Istio, and Istio is an open source project from Google, which is a pretty popular service mesh framework, and it's very widely used. So when you enable Anthos Service Mesh, it is a fully managed Istio service. You don't have to manage the data plane. You don't have to manage the control plane. That's what Anthos gives you as part of this service mesh service. Additionally, you also get this topology view of your microservices, where you can see the trace for each service, like which service is calling the other one, and you get a nice view like this. Of course, with the Istio comes the advantages like the metrics, logging, tracing, and SLO monitoring. So SLOs are service level objectives where you can define the service level objectives in terms of your latency or in terms of your availability or other metrics. And within Anthos, you can easily enable the SLO monitoring. So whenever a particular parameter goes out of your SLO, you can get a notification or an alert, and this helps with the SRE practice methodologies. With Istio, of course, there comes the advantages of service identity and the authorization authentication and the MTLS encryption. You can also route traffic and load balance your services across the clusters using Anthos Service Mesh. That's one of the major benefits of using Anthos Service Mesh. You can have multiple services in different clusters, and you can load balance across them. With Service Mesh, definitely there comes the concept of Ingress, and Ingress for Anthos is also one of the services that is built from GCP's global HTTP load balancing. So using Ingress for Anthos, you can define multi-cluster services and multi-cluster ingresses. So what this does is you can easily have a resilient deployment approach, and you can design for high availability across regions, which utilizes the load balancers, Anycast IP, and Google's global network, which is one of the best global load balancers available. With the premium networking and the Google's network infrastructure, the performance is pretty much unparalleled with the global load balancer. So that's what Ingress for Anthos provides you. And coming to Cloud Run, which is one of the services, which is a serverless offering, and it's based on Knative. It is personally one of my favorite cloud services out there. It's a pretty amazing service. You can deploy your own services from a container image, and Cloud Run manages the scaling and the service and the ingress and everything for your service. So when you use Cloud Run, you have two options. One is the fully managed Cloud Run service, where you don't really care about the infrastructure. You can just provide your container image, and Cloud Run will run the container image, will scale down to 0 as well, and it will serve traffic from your container image as well as scale as per the demand increases. You can also enable Cloud Run for Anthos, where you can actually enable running the Cloud Run services on your own GKE or on your own Anthos clusters. Again, in your own cluster, the service can scale down to 0, and with the auto scaling, it can scale up as the demand increases for the service. The next service is Migrate for Anthos. So Migrate for Anthos is a service which actually converts your VMs to containers for you. It's a fully automated service where you can have your existing services running on Compute Engine or VMware or AWS, and it will convert the entire VM to a container. It will provide you with a migration plan as well as a Docker file for your container and the container image, of course, in the artifact registry, and how you can. It's the easiest way to re-platform your application into containers. It has recently announced the support for Windows workloads in beta, and there is also a new CRD-based API, custom resource definition again. If you don't want to create your migrations using the Google Cloud APIs, you can create a migration custom resource and a source provider custom resource, and it will the operator will listen for the custom resource migration and create the migration plan and the artifacts for you. Now, binary authorization is one of the most important security services in GKE and Anthos. So using binary authorization, you can enforce the container images that are deployed across your cluster, and in the case of Anthos, across all of your clusters. So it is compatible with artifact registry, and that was previously called as Google Container Registry. So basically, what binary authorization means is each of your container image has to be attested by a security reviewer or a service, which can be a person or a service, and only if the image is attested, the image will be allowed to run on your cluster or anywhere in your environment, in Anthos' case. So it is basically implemented as an admission controller. So in Kubernetes, the admission controller inspects every Kubernetes object if it conforms to the standard, and it checks for the image attestations. If the required attestations are not present on the image, on any image that you create a deployment or a pod with, it will not allow the pod to be created, and that is one of the primary security features for Anthos. You can also have a condition for image name or image path patterns if you are storing them on your Git repository. So again, if any pod is created in your cluster, in any of the clusters, and the image name does not follow a particular standard, or it does not fall under a path that you have defined, the admission controller will deny the creation of the pod. So it will just not create the pod if it's not conforming to the image standard. With security, obviously there is a question for identity management, and this is very recently announced at Google Next, where you can use your existing OIDC providers and manage the identities across Kubernetes clusters. It is currently generally available for on-prem, and it is in beta for AWS clusters. BigQuery Omni is one of the coolest announcements of Google Next this year. So basically, BigQuery Omni is a service where you can take the BigQuery's compute capability across to AWS, and you can process the data in S3 on AWS using the BigQuery's engine called REML, and it's currently available in private alpha, where you can contact the Google customer engineers if you want to enable the service. and it's a pretty amazing idea where you don't need to take your data to BigQuery, but instead BigQuery will come to where the data is and process the data. So there is a very minimum moving of data, and you get the benefits of BigQuery processing on your own data. There are also some other updates coming from Google Next in regards to Anthos. So there is a major announcement uh, under the hybrid AI space where speech to text is now generally available for on-prem. So speech to text is a very popular service from Google where you can do your subtitling and various other use cases for speech to text. And now you can run it on-prem on your premises, where if you already have speech data, you can enable speech to text on-prem and convert your audios to text where the files are. So you don't need to move your speech files to Google Cloud uh, and undergo the entire process and the cost and the time for moving your data. Uh, the other update is NVIDIA has announced that the GPU operator is available with Anthos in beta. So if you have a VMware environment running with Anthos with Anthos on-prem, you can use your NVIDIA GPUs in the data centers with Anthos workloads. And the third announcement is that marketplace applications for Anthos are also available to deploy on EKS. This is not a new announcement from Google Next, but it is very interesting and a major announcement in my opinion, that you can deploy any Anthos marketplace applications on GKE, of course, as well as on EKS, and it's a very interesting announcement. So that's pretty much it for the components of Anthos. It has been a lot to digest. I know it's a very vast service and a very vast platform. Uh, so we'll now come to the use cases for Anthos, where I have a couple of use cases to share from the Google solutions. So the first one is called Modern CI/CD using Anthos, where uh, basically to modernize your operations and to modernize your deployment, your application deployment, you have multiple Kubernetes clusters for your environments for development, staging, and production, and where your production is also highly available in other regions, and you want that for resiliency, you want that for failover as well. So you can see in the diagram here that you have a development cluster where your application developers can develop and do their own unit testing for the microservices. Uh, from development cluster, the code from basically the CI/CD or the Git and artifact registry, it can go to another cluster for staging. And once the code is decided to be promoted to production, you can deploy it across regions using Anthos Service Mesh to distribute the traffic and to maintain the high availability in production. Now, if you look at the bottom, we have Anthos config management, which is across all of the environments and across all the clusters to ensure the compliance and the security standards of the entire organization for all the applications. Uh, Along with this, there is also binary authorization. There is identity and other add-ons for security, which you use uh, to enforce a very secure CI/CD and secure deployment approach. There is a very detailed description for this for the solution available on the link, in the reference. And the second use case for Anthos is a very interesting one called Anthos on Edge. So with the Anthos bare metal announcements, you can deploy your Kubernetes clusters on in low connectivity areas, and you can also use the hardware specific benefits where you can have GPUs or ML processing units where you can utilize those specific hardware uh, benefits. And even in the case of unreliable connectivity, you can ensure that your applications are deployed, and whenever the connection is established, there can be reporting of the metrics, reporting of the availability, and any updates to the application, and ensuring that the application is running in a self-healing way with of course the benefits of Kubernetes and the reconciliation there, that if there is a failure on the edge without a connectivity, the Kubernetes can ensure the application is running again with reconciliation, and the security of the entire supply chain here, of the software supply chain here, is ensured using the Anthos security features, which we have discussed, like binary authorization and service mesh and all of the features of Anthos. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much for the second solution. This is also available in the Google documentation if you want to have a look. And that's it for the use cases. So the question is, if you want to get started with Anthos, um, there is a program recently announced from Google called Cloud App Modernization Program, CAMP for short, where the Google where it's a program where they will assess your modernization stage where you currently are, and devise a plan for you, the modernization plan, with a timeline where you can modernize your application. Uh, for specifically to Anthos, there is the documentation available on Google Cloud's website, and there are free quick labs where you can explore the Anthos services. There is a Coursera training which you can explore. Uh, the ebook called Anthos Under the Hood is an amazing ebook. I highly recommend it. You can have a look at how Anthos is implemented, how it runs, and with great insights into Anthos. And there is also a YouTube playlist for Anthos 101 with all the Google Next sessions, and of course Google Next sessions are the main place to hear more about Anthos and the announcements related to Anthos. Um, that's it for the session. Thank you, everyone. And if we have any questions in the chat, I'll be happy to answer them. So I am looking at the chat, and if there are any questions, we can answer. And Karthik, do let me know if there is anything.
Sure, looks like everything is super clear to everyone.
That's great.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Kaivalya. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and do reach out to me if there are any questions you have on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'll be happy to answer them. And yeah, thank you.
Sure.